What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I'm making this video to discuss the game yesterday against the Bills. There is a lot to discuss, and then a couple things from today as well. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get right into it. Before I begin with stats from the game and analysis and so on and so forth, I want to make sure to once again give you the injury report and the inactives from yesterday. So first, the injury report. The Dolphins will be without center Daniel Kilgore, safety Rashad Jones, and defensive end Avery Moss when they face the Buffalo Bills. So those three players obviously were out, and also were then, three of the players on the inactive list. 3 of the 7 inactive players. Let's see. Those 3 players were ruled out Friday when the team released its final injury report of the week. Kilgore with a knee, Jones with a chest, and Moss with an ankle didn't practice all week. Cornerback Xavier Howard with a knee and wide receiver Jakeem Grant with a hamstring, who both missed the Washington game, were the only players listed as questionable. They were limited in practice all week. None of the other 8 players listed on the injury report had game status designation, meaning they'll all be available. Those 8 were guard tackle Jesse Davis, defensive end Charles Harris, linebacker Trent Harris, cornerback Chris Lamons, safety Bobby McCain, quarterback Josh Rosen, running back Mark Walton, and wide receiver Albert Wilson. Buffalo listed 3 players as questionable: cornerback Taron Johnson with a hamstring, linebacker Matt Milano with a hamstring, and linebacker Corey Thompson with an ankle. The inactives were as follows: safety Rashad Jones, cornerback Xavier Howard, running back Myles Gaskin, center Daniel Kilgore, center guard Keaton Sutherland, tackle Andrew Donald, defensive end Avery Moss. So there you go. That's the injury report and the inactives list. And so real quick too, let me also note that this was certainly the best game that we've played in multiple ways, on multi layers, multi levels, right? Multiple levels. It was definitely the most exciting, and for me, the first time, if you were with me in my live stream, for the first time, I was actually super excited. We actually looked like legitimately competitive against a decent team, but there are caveats to that. And so this game, there are some factors that when you look at them, there are some factors that point towards this game could have actually been a lot worse than what it was. But there were a lot of good things, and the offense did perform pretty well overall. But at the end of the day, it came down to we lost, and in my opinion, from my perspective, based off of the information and the facts and stuff that I have available, it seems to me that at the end, because we were hanging in there, we were doing well pretty much all game, there were a couple key decisions that were made later in the game that to me cost us the game. And so, not only, again, is the design of the team to be bad, and that is definitely the responsibility of the coaching staff and the front office and the ownership, designing the team to be intentionally bad. That is definitely their responsibility, but also there are more and more examples of questionable at best, if you're being as fair as possible, questionable at best decisions made by this coaching staff on the field in critical moments, that lead you to believe that they are legitimately trying to put us in positions that have unfavorable chances of success, right? And it's 2 straight weeks in a row, right? We could have taken it into overtime last week against the Redskins and gotten a victory. And I'm not going to rehash that game, but if you watch my old videos, I explain why. And it's, I think, a pretty convincing argument. But watch that for yourself. But in this game, there were definitely decisions made that were super questionable, and I'm going to get to those in a minute. But again, I just wanted to note that overall, it certainly was the and there were some good things to take from this game, and there are definitely some players that we are starting to see some consistency from, you know, like Mark Walton and Preston Williams and Vince Beagle, right? Guys that could potentially be, you know, some building blocks. But that's still only a handful of guys, and I expect there to be massive roster turnover at the end of this year still. So we're still going to have a super fresh, super young, super inexperienced team next year regardless anyway, especially because some of the guys that I expect we're going to end up getting rid of will probably be veterans like Rashad Jones and maybe Albert Wilson. There's still a distinct possibility that Kenyon Drake gets traded. It's even still possible that Xavier Howard gets traded at this point. So we'll see what happens. And I think that, you know, personally, I think that they would be very mistaken to trade Xavier Howard or Kenyon Drake at this point. I think because, especially considering the fact that there are a handful of guys that are kind of starting to emerge as potential guys that you could build around. So if you really want to, you know, put credibility to your argument, and I'm talking about the coaching staff and the front office and so on and so forth, Taco Charlton, right? He got another sack in this game, right? So, you know, there are some guys that are showing some potential promise. So if you want to lend credibility to your argument, you know, about building for the future and so on, you already have more than enough draft capital and cap space. You do not need to accrue anymore. Again, I'm still not convinced that they're going to draft appropriately and prioritize correctly and so on and so forth. And I still think it's going to be a massive failure at the end of the day, because no matter what the successes that they have might be, it's pretty clear that, to me, that their decisions are just so self-destructive, and their whole philosophy, at least in the immediate, you know, future and the present day, and obviously the most recent past, their philosophy is to be so self-destructive that they're not going to be able to recover from it. And no matter what little successes they may end up having along the way or what have you, right? And at this point, if we ended up winning a couple games and we don't get the first overall pick, I find it very likely that they'll end up trading up to make sure that they get that number 1 pick anyway, so that way they can then take Tua or whoever it is that Stephen Ross wants. So there's still a lot of, you know, downsides and negatives here, and it seems like, you know, so I would certainly advise against that. But there's a lot of, and we'll see. I mean, you know, there's only 8 days until the trade deadline, so that we'll know for sure. I mean, those things are still up in the air, right? So we'll have to wait and see how those play out before we can make evaluations on those things. I would say that, you know, my take is they should absolutely avoid trading those guys, you know, even though, whatever, they just should, because, you know, we don't have, like, there's hardly anybody on this roster as of right, like, so, right, again, my point is, there's a handful of guys that are starting to emerge from, you know, the team that they brought in, which is almost entirely new. There's like a handful of guys that were here last year, right? So, it's almost an entirely new team. They have a couple guys, you know, that are starting to emerge from this young, inexperienced group. And they also have a couple guys that are, you know, proven veteran keystones, right? Cornerstones, whatever, that you can build around. It's still not that many. You still need, you know, starters across the board and depth to back them up and so on and so forth. And then you got to make sure that you get all your picks right and all this other stuff. So let's not continue to shoot ourselves in the foot and make it worse by trading those guys away. Let's make sure that we have something to take out of this year to build around, if you want to lend any kind of credibility to your arguments. Anyway, so let me go ahead and really start getting into this, though, because like I said, there is a lot to talk about. So, I mean, you know, yeah. So real quick. All right, so as we know, the Dolphins lost the game. Ultimately, I think that result was going to be inevitable. One, because of the design of this roster, and two, because of the clear, to me, what seemed like clear decisions on the field to look, and again, to be as fair as possible, you could say, you know, the decisions that they are making are, you know, if you don't want to put it in the framing or the context of intentionally trying to fail or what have you, the best you can really frame it is as putting us in positions that have the, you know, lowest probability of success, but then you thereby almost ensure or yeah, the lowest probability of success, and then you almost inevitably therefore you know, ensure that failure is the outcome. But what have you, like the 2-point conversion from last week, everything about that play was wrong. The decision, because, you know, going into overtime would have given you the higher probability, blah, 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 all these things, so on and so forth. And part of their reasoning again, too, which again I said was bullshit, is they said they had Kenyon Drake in there because Mark Walton had a thumb issue. Well, and they put him on the injury report, but he played that entire game, and then he played the entire game today. So how big of an issue was it? I think, again, it's just another example of them just trying to make excuses for their bad decisions, but they're intentional decisions. So they're trying to play it off like, oh, it just didn't work because of happenstance. We felt really good about the play. We practiced it all week. But the key guy in the play, the guy who's catching the pass to take it into the end zone to get the win, didn't practice it at all. And the guy who did practice it, we held out of that play and then came up with some bullshit excuse that he had some, you know, mysterious thumb issue. Come on, bro. Anyway, so the Dolphins lost, as we know. Again, I believe ultimately inevitable because of those two reasons, because of the design of this team by this coaching staff and this regime, and because of, to me, again, I mean, you know, it's even hard to call it my perspective at this point because it seems pretty clear and pretty brazen. It's getting, but you know, I mean, to be fair, I'll call it my perspective and we'll allow the data to continue to accumulate and see if we have any other chances, you know, and I'm sure there will be other examples, the Jets games, the Bengals game, maybe even next week, you know, Monday night football on national TV against the Steelers. If there are any games in which we have an opportunity to win, the decisions of the coaching staff are super important at that point. And we'll see where the data leads us at that point. Also, let's note that, you know, Ryan Fitzpatrick and this offense actually had a pretty damn good game. The defense did not play nearly as well as what it would seem based off of the fact that they only got 3, you know, field goals on their first 3 drives instead of touchdowns, and it was a lot closer than you know, it seemed throughout most of this game, what have you. But at the end of the day, the Bills really ended up shooting themselves in the foot a lot, especially in those first 3 drives. All of those first 3 drives, the reasons why they ended up having to kick field goals as opposed to touchdowns was far more attributed to the fact that the Bills shot themselves in the foot with like penalties, drop passes, and, you know, other mistakes that ended up stalling their drives. Yes, we got stops as well, so the defense has some credit there, but it was more so on the failure of the Bills. And so they really could have been up 21-0 at that point as opposed to 9-0 if they just didn't shoot themselves in the foot. And so this game actually could have been a lot different. The Bills now are obviously 5-1. They won 31-21. Again, a season high though in points. We scored 3 touchdowns. Ryan Fitzpatrick had a good game, but he wasn't stellar either, right? He had one touchdown, but also threw an interception, right? And let's also note that the longer that Ryan Fitzpatrick goes with having like success and playing well, the more it guarantees that he's gonna have the exact opposite and have like 3 picks in a game and start throwing pick sixes all over the place and shit like that. Why? Because that's who Ryan Fitzpatrick is. You're not gonna all of a sudden change that. He is the starter going into this next game against the Steelers, so we'll see how that goes. I'm really interested to see because Minkah Fitzpatrick is going to be on the other side of the field as well. He knows Ryan Fitzpatrick, he knows Josh Rosen, he knows this team, and so on and so forth. So that's going to be really interesting to watch for next week. And again, it's going to be on Monday, so it's going to be on national television for the entire world to see. So I'm super fascinated about that game, and I hope that we just don't get embarrassed in that game and we can keep it close. But again, though, we'll have to pay attention to the decisions made. Now, let's note real quick, though, that there was a ton of bad, or not a ton, but there was a few calls in this game that were super bad, right? So there were a ton of penalties. We had 6, they had 9. Those were accepted penalties, right? So that, you know, I think that's an important piece of context that needs to be made clear. So there, you know, there were probably another additional couple penalties, I think, that were ultimately declined in this game at some point. So there were more flags thrown overall, but that was the number of accepted penalties, 6 for us, 9 for them. But also plays to my point about how they shot themselves in the foot a lot. Now, there were some bad calls. Now, a couple of those penalties, though, on the Bills, 2 of those penalties, in fact, there were 2 penalties on the Bills that I thought were just total bullshit calls. 100% total bullshit calls. I have to call it like it is. I have to be objective. You know, I watched it in the bang bang in the moment and on the replays, and the replays verified, right? So the first one was a roughing the passer on the Bills defense that gave us, you know, obviously a first down and a chunk of yardage. It was total bullshit, right? Because all that happened was, and the defender even had his hands like up. He didn't push Ryan Fitzpatrick or anything. He literally just chest bumped him, and Ryan Fitzpatrick fell to the ground. He had some backward momentum, whatever. Maybe he played it up a little bit, but they called a roughing the passer penalty on that, and it's super weak at best. To me, it was just a total bullshit call, right? So there was no way. So that might have, you know, completely changed the outlook too. Again, if the Bills didn't shoot themselves in the foot the first 3 drives, they could have been up 21-0 at that point. With that roughing the passer penalty, if that wasn't there, then that would have, you know, changed the game as well. We would have scored less points, right? But again, and I mean, you guys can go back and look at it yourself. It was a total bullshit call. But there was also another one. There was a defensive holding penalty. Oh, right. I think it might have been on a running play. I don't remember exactly what the play was, but it was a defensive holding penalty where they said that, you know, obviously the Bills defender was holding, but when you looked at the replay, our guy, I think it was a receiver, had their hand jammed up in his face and was like, you know, like the dude's like face was all like up in the air and like pushed back. So at absolute most, if he was holding it all, it was more him just trying to like fight the dude off him because he was getting his fucking neck twisted all around and shit because he was getting a fucking hand to the face, right? So there's a legitimate argument to be made that you could say illegal hands to the face on our guy. And if you call both of those, then they offset, you replay that down, or really, if you know, frankly, I would just say don't call either of those. But if that's the case, yeah, I mean, but you know, and then if that's the case, then you know, whatever, then that, you know, that changes the play a little bit, although probably a little bit less. But it shouldn't have given us, additional yardage and an automatic first down and shit like that. Like, we shouldn't have gotten helped because there's no reason why that defensive holding call should have been on them. Now, but to be completely fair, there was also a bad, because I want, again, I want this to be fair, objective. I want it to be based on the facts. And there was a bad call on us as well. And it was an offensive holding penalty that at one point, or that also, that it was, I think it might have been on first down, because I think it ended up being a 10-yard penalty, which backed us in replay of down. I think it ended up being 1st and 20. But regardless of whatever down it was a beautiful play. It was a beautiful catch by Mike Gesicki. It was for like 27 yards. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And it was a bullshit offensive holding call by the refs on us that negated that play and then sent us back 10 yards. So again, just to be completely fair, because there was some bad officiating on both sides of the ball. But overall, even if you take out the officiating altogether, that's one of the factors that would lead you to believe that this game could have been even more out of hand. So in other words, if the Bills didn't get those penalties that early in the game that shot themselves in the foot, that stopped them from getting it, because the first 2 drives of the game, they got field goals instead of touchdowns because of self-inflicted wounds penalties. They were legit penalties, but penalties nonetheless. That could have been 14 points instead of 6 points right there. Completely would have changed the game, right? Those, defensive holding penalties, those would have benefited the Bills, right? Or the defensive holding and the roughing the passer, the bullshit calls, those would have helped the Bills. So if you take the penalties out, that would have favored the Bills and would lead you to believe that this game would have been even more skewed in the Bills' favor. Even when you take out the bad call against us, because then that would lead you to believe that we would have gotten that 27-yard pass even still, although at the same time, that specific play might not have even happened anyway, because the game at that play was much later in the game, and the game dynamics would have been, totally different at that point. So who knows how the game would have been at that point, but all I'm saying is potentially the game could have been a lot worse for us than it was based off of some of that information. But so the thing is, though, is we went into the half with a lead. We got the ball back after half. We were sitting in really good position. Things were great. And to me, right, the thing that made the difference in this game was bad play calling in the second half, right? We had opportunities. We had things going well. Obviously, we were moving the ball pretty well the entire game and so on and so forth, right? And so we were putting up points, actually. Ryan Fitzpatrick was doing some good things, right? That offensive line was actually holding up well. The defense didn't play as well as I would have liked overall, but they are really banged up, and they did do enough for sure, right? And so what it ended up coming down to was a few play calls that cost us this game, and that's on the coaching staff. Right, so to be more specific, there was a 3rd and 3 later in the game in which, we're rolling. We got 3rd and short. It's 3rd and fucking short, right? And so, what would you think you would do on a 3rd and short, right? That's what you want. 3rd and manageable, 3rd and something easy. If you're not going to run the ball, okay, which they didn't, they chose to pass it. If you're not going to run the ball, which is fair, I would say your best chances are to pass it, considering the fact that our running game has been very anemic. Although this is the first game we actually did pass 100 rushing yards, but we'll get to this more of the stats in a minute. Anyway, so if you're going to choose to pass, then you do shorter routes, short to intermediate routes, right? So you're going to do what? Maybe some slants, maybe some outs, some curls, some comebacks. Maybe you have, a running back or something that goes out into, or a tight end or something that goes out into the flat, right? stuff like that. Maybe, you know, an RPO or something like that. But no, what did they do? They had intermediate to deep routes. Why? Why would you have intermediate to deep routes on a fucking 3rd and 3? There was a 3rd and 12 later in the game where they had deep routes as well. 2 of the routes were just straight go routes. The 2 outside receivers were straight go routes or posts or something like that, but really deep. Why would you do that? Even in that case, right? It's a little bit more likely because it's 3rd and 12, but I'll explain why that was the bad decision in that moment. But the 3rd and 3, absolutely without question, no reason to have intermediate to deep routes. And pretty much every single, I think maybe one of the routes was a shorter route that was somewhere near the chains, right? All you need to do is get the fucking first down. Give yourself another, you know, few plays. And it's not like we were in terrible field position either at that point, right? So we could have kept moving. We could have kept that drive alive, but deep routes. Why? And then, you know, no bueno, right? And then so on the 3rd and 12, it was later in the game. And so you really, you know, this was the 3rd and 3, you maybe would go for it on 4th down, but really, I mean, if you just called the right kind of play and so on and so forth, you could have been, you should have been, especially because we were 53% on 3rd downs in this game. And that was with these 2 third downs that failed. So you could have, but the rest of the game, you know, overall in the game, we were 53%. We could have easily gotten that, well, relatively easily. I mean, with the way the game played out, we could have gotten that 3rd and 3. You just don't call fucking... Anyway, I'm sorry. It pisses me off, right? But with the 3rd and 12, that was a situation where you'd be a lot more likely to go for it on 4th down because it was far later in the game. Time is running out. And you know, at this point, you're going to probably need an onside kick as well. And you'd actually even be more likely to go for it on 4th down, even if it was like 4th and 5, 4th and 6, because of the stage in the game. Also, let's note that there was a very, very bad use of timeouts in this game by Brian Flores. But in both halves. In the first half, there was one that it was like towards the end of the half, they had the ball, and there was just absolutely no reason for Brian Flores to call a timeout, but he calls a timeout and stops the clock and gave them just additional opportunities to try and score more points on us before the half. So it was totally mind-boggling. But then we end up at the very end of the game in this situation of like 3rd and 12 with the clock running down, blah blah blah, and we don't have any fucking timeouts at the end. He burns through our timeouts in the second half, so we didn't have any at the end. And then in this 3rd and 12, you might consider on 4th down, for like 4th and 5, going for it, but instead on 3rd and 12, it was 2 like go routes or post routes or whatever, 2 super deep routes. And then the other 2 routes were at best intermediate routes. No, what you want is, again, you want shorter to intermediate routes, like some slants, maybe some outs or curls or whatever, you know, routes that go between, you know, 5 to 12 yards, 5 to 15 yards, so that way, or 5 to 15 yards really, so that way you can, you know, maybe hopefully get a first down. If you can get, you know, one of those like 12 to 15 yard routes open and get the first down there, or at least get a chunk of that to give yourself a better opportunity on 4th down to go for it. But again, just these super long routes for what? For what? Why are you trying to just go for it? Go for it all when it's not necessary. And that's the thing. And that's the same thing with the 2-point conversion last week. You're unnecessarily going for it all. It's like throwing a Hail Mary, you know, I don't know what the exact example would be in game, but like, you know, just throwing a Hail Mary, I don't know, man, like, in the first half of the game, you're down by like a score, and just for no reason, you know, but the half is coming to a close, you know, but you have like 2 minutes left, and you know, you still have the 2 minute warning, and you just decide in a, you know, a 3rd and 4, and you just decide to throw a fucking Hail Mary. Like, why? I know that was some like super elaborate, like, you know, whatever. Anyway, but I'm trying to get a point. Like, there was no need for it, right? You're like taking the all or nothing shot for absolutely no reason. And then again, of course, the just bad use of timeouts throughout this game. And so ultimately, when it comes down to it, I think that we lost this game because of the coaching staff and the front office. They designed this team to be young and inexperienced, to be, you know, unproven players, to be, you know, less talented, all of that, to be lacking in leadership and so on and so forth. They designed that on purpose so we could intentionally be bad. So that's on the coaching staff in the front office in this regime. But also those decisions on the field are more, well, that's all on the coaching staff, right? So those are their decisions to bear, but they're factors that are causing us to lose games when we could win them. So it's just lending more evidence to that they're not really actually trying to win. Also, let's note that, you know, these Dolphins players, man, I mean, this locker room is fracturing. We're seeing more and more fractures within this locker room all the time. So a couple examples. One, 31 seconds into this game, our number 1 pick from this year got ejected. Christian Wilkins got ejected from the game because he threw a punch at a Bills offensive lineman. 31 seconds into this game. And then let's also note that there were reports today that Bobby McCain is getting disciplined by the Dolphins because he got into verbal altercations with fans, Dolphins fans, who are rooting for the Bills in this game. And apparently that even included a child of 13 years of age. So apparently he got into some heated altercation with them because they were rooting for the Dolphins to lose. And while you probably should not do that, I would agree, especially if, you know, there's a kid involved, and he should be, you know, fined or whatever it is for that. However, it is understandable from a couple different perspectives. One, he's tired of this fucking losing bullshit. He's tired of the philosophy that, you know, we're gonna suck. He's tired of all of that bullshit. And also, he's mad, and rightfully so, that the fan base, there's a large contingent of the fan base that are essentially traitors, right? That are literally rooting for their team to lose just so they can, you know, guarantee a hope, right? Because all you would guarantee is that number 1 pick. And if you get Tua Tagovailoa, okay, sure, maybe you guarantee him, but that doesn't guarantee you success by any stretch of the imagination. So anyway, I mean, that, you know, that is what it is. But again, showing that, you know, the seams are coming out. And anyway, so one other quick note though, before I get into the actual stats of this game, because I've given most of my analysis now. There are a couple other things that I'll talk about as we go through the actual stats. But I did want to note that Ryan Tannehill did get the start for the Titans this past week, and they played the Chargers and they came out with the win. Ryan Tannehill sparked this team to a win, or that team to a win, you know, and so I'm going to be really curious to see how that goes. I had said that, last week that I'll be curious to see if how Ryan Tannehill does, and see if he leads them to some victories, and he did. he's a tactician, man, and he does some damn good things, and he led that squad to a victory. So I'm going to be really curious to see how that plays out for the rest of the season. I would expect he's going to get the start again this next week. Now, but, and to be fair, let's juxtapose that. Ryan Fitzpatrick did some of the same thing, right? Last week, he played for one quarter. It was against a bad Redskins team, so let's make sure we're in full context. Whereas last week, Ryan Tannehill came in, but played against a, good team, a solid team with a good defense. Ryan Fitzpatrick came in and played against a bad defense, or not a bad defense, but a bad team that was tired and worn out at that point. Now, again, he did come in and play well in this game. The offense overall played well, but that's really the key is that the offensive line played well. There weren't nearly as many drops and so on and so forth. So the receivers are helping out more and all of that stuff. So the team played well, more so than it was Fitzpatrick. Again, he wasn't stellar, but he did help more than he hurt. And he's certainly, but there is also, a lot of potential for him to have, to just lay a massive goose egg. Also, let's note, though, that I was wrong about some things. After all, I was wrong that in my prediction, I thought that, the Bills were going to go, I think I said 35-0. But I'm super happy that they didn't shut us out. Although, again, there are some factors in this that would lead you to believe that it actually could have been worse. Although I was right that the Bills did end up scoring over 30 points. They ended up with 31. I was semi-wrong about their defensive statistics. They didn't have a ton of sacks in this game, but they did have, their defense was all over the field. They were getting tackles all day. They did have the interception. They got a bunch of passes defensed and tackles for loss. So their defense was doing some damn good things. But I was also wrong about the fact that I said I thought that the Bills offense was going to light us up. Now, the reason why I was wrong about that, though, again, is mostly because they shot themselves in the foot. It was the penalties and so on and so forth. Although a couple of those were again, bullshit calls. Anyway, so let's get into this, though. But also, real quick, too, I was wrong that I thought that the Bills were going to have over 200 yards rushing. They did make it over 100 yards in total, but they did not cross the 200-yard mark. But let's see. And so we actually had more total yards than they did, 381. So that was a pleasant surprise as well. But again, this coaching staff made sure to find a way to lose. And also, as far as this doesn't hurt our point differential that bad, it only makes it 10 points worse. But that still is, a data point that at the end of the year could still, lend to the argument that we're the worst team ever. And we still are on pace for that at the end of the day. We are still winless. We still did give up another 31 points in this game. So again, like I said, when we've played good teams, and this was a good team, they still end up scoring 31 points. And so that makes, we're now at 190 something points. We're almost up to 200 points given up on the season. Although we did end up scoring 21 points in this game. But look, I mean, are we ever going to break 30? I don't think we're going to ever see a game where we break 30. Are we going to see many where we even break 20? Probably not, So there is still potential that we could end up being the worst offense to ever exist. We still are on pace for that. Although there is some positive progress in the fact that, now 2 straight weeks, although again, full context, last week we played a bad team. This year, and a lot of those points came in, at the very end of the game when, their, defense and stuff was tired and so on and so forth, when we had fresh quarterback in there, what have you. but we did score, more points. This game, the offense did look more, capable. So we'll see how things go, and hopefully we can get some more guys healthy. We'll see how things go. Hopefully we can end up avoid being, the worst team to ever exist, in that way. We'll see how things play out. But as it stands right now, we are still on pace to be the worst team that ever existed across the board. So, again, there were some positives, but the bad still outweighs the good overall. Anyway, but we had 381 total yards. They had 305. We had 272 passing yards. They had 188. We had 109 rushing yards. They had 117. We were 5.8 yards per play, and they were 6. We had 1 fumble and 1 interception. They didn't have any turnovers, so they did win the turnover battle. I was correct about that. We were 53% on third downs. Again, I think a little bit of an aberration, because some of that was due to penalties, including some bad penalties, some bad officiating, and they were 30%. But I'll take it, and that's awesome. So, I'll take that win. But again, I just want to make sure it's all in full context. We had the ball for 33 minutes and 31 seconds. They had it for 26-29. We had 6 penalties, and they had 9. Okay, so passing statistics, Ryan Fitzpatrick was 23 for 35, 65.7% completion percentage, 282 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and an 88 passer rating. So like I said, not stellar, but he did it was an above average performance. So that's good. But not stellar. And again, but see, that's the thing is if you have a good team effort, you don't have to have a quarterback that has, a stellar performance every game, right? That's why, again, that plays into why I don't think people should put as much hype into the quarterback position as they do. You just need an above average quarterback with a good overall team, a good offensive line, good weapons around him, and a good defense, good special teams. So, I mean, and this shows that, you can have a good performance. We didn't end up winning the game, I believe, because of the coaches. But you can have an above average performance and, give yourself a shot. We could have won this game. Anyway, Josh Allen was 16 for 26, 61.5% completion percentage for 202 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 111.4 passer rating. In the rush game, Mark Walton was 14 for 66 yards and a 4.7 average. Kenyon Drake was 6 for 21 and a 3.5. Ryan Fitzpatrick was 6 for 13 with 1 touchdown and a 2.2 average. So Ryan Fitzpatrick did also get a rushing touchdown in the game, which was awesome. That was fun to watch. Kalen Ballage was 3 of 7 for a touchdown and 2.3 average. Frank Gore for them was 11 for 55 yards and a 5 average. Josh Allen was 4 rushes for 32 yards and an 8 average. Devin Singletary, 7 rushes, 26 yards and a 3.7. In the receiving game, Preston Williams led the way for us, 6 of 8 for 82 yards. Devontae Parker was 5 of 10 for 55 yards and a touchdown. And so look, those guys are putting up some production, but let's note that neither of them to this point are performing to number 1 receiver levels. But with Preston Williams performing at least as well as Devontae Parker, if not better, although let's also note, to be fair, Devontae Parker now does have a touchdown catch in the past 3 games. I think it's a little bit more happenstance than anything, but it's, the facts, so we'll be fair about that. But neither of them are performing to number 1 receiver levels, and Preston Williams is matching him pretty much tit for tat. So I do think that there also is a substantial possibility that Devontae Parker doesn't stick around either going into next year. We'll see. We'll see what kind of personnel decisions this front office makes. I mean, they're going to be around next season for sure. So let's see what kind of personnel decisions they make going forward between now and the trade deadline and over the course of the rest of the season and next offseason. Allen Hurns was 3 of 3 for 53 yards. Mike Gesicki 4 of 4 for 41. That should have been 5 of 5 for 68. But again, that one bullshit offensive holding penalty on us wiped out that 27-yard Mike Gesicki catch. Kenyon Drake was 3 of 4 for 37 yards. Albert Wilson 1 of 2 for 22. John Brown led the way for them, 5 of 6 for 83 yards and a score. Patrick DeMarco was 1 of 1 for 27 yards. Duke Williams 1 of 1 for 23. Dawson Knox 2 of 5 for 22. Cole Beasley 3 of 6 for 16 and a score. Frank Gore 1 of 1 for 11 and Isaiah McKenzie 2 of 3 for 11. Ryan Fitzpatrick had 2 fumbles but didn't lose either of them. Preston Williams did have a fumble. Tre'Davious White caused it, and unfortunately it was recovered by them. Eric Rowe led the way for us on the defense. There also, real quick, there have been reports that he's being used in like a hybrid perimeter corner / linebacker role. Whatever, man. I mean, there's also a lot of, and they did it again in this game a little bit with that amoeba defense thing where players are moving around. It's interesting, but I don't know how long that's going to last. I mean, we'll see. We'll see if it continues. I mean, it hasn't been particularly successful to this point, but it has had some success. Let's see if they can continue. 2 things. 1, let's see if they can continue to grow the success of it. And 2, does it remain successful, right? And, or do teams, catch on to it and then blah, 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 right? Also, too, let's note that our second half adjustments have been particularly poor overall across the board in all of our games. But anyway, Eric Rowe led the way with 5 solo tackles. Raekwon McMillan had 4 solo, 2 assisted, and a tackle for loss. Vince Beagle, again, another, potential bright spot and building block. Had 3 solo, 2 assisted tackles, a sack, and a tackle for loss. Although, again, let's be completely clear. That sack, tackle for loss, and one of his tackles are all the same stat. They just end up registering in those different categories. Taco Charleston had 3 solo tackles, 1 assisted, a sack, and a tackle for loss. Jerome Baker, 3 solo, 1 assisted tackle. Ken Webster, who got hurt in this game, had 3 solo tackles, 1 assisted. Devon Godshaw had 1 solo, 2 assisted, and a pass defense. Now, again, like I said, and this is been consistent in every single game that we've played, you see our defensive statistics aren't, all that great. Even the tackles don't even tend to get that high. I think like the most tackles any one of our players has had in a single game thus far, I think is 8. But whereas you see, like last week, the opposing defense had a guy with 10 tackles, but they have defensive statistics all over the board. So Jordan Poyer led the way for them, had 7 solo tackles, 2 assisted with 2 tackles for loss. Levi Wallace, 7 solo tackles. Lorenzo Alexander, 5 solo, 5 assisted with a pass defense. Tremaine Edmonds, 5 solo, 3 assisted with a tackle for loss. Maurice Alexander, 5 solo, 2 assisted. Micah Hyde, 5 solo tackles. Tre'Davious White, 4 solo tackles, 1 assisted tackle, a forced fumble, an interception, and a pass defense. Trent Murphy, 3 solo tackles, 1 assisted tackle, 1 tackle for loss. Jordan Phillips, 2 solo tackles and a forced fumble. I'm pretty sure he also had a sack in there, but I could be wrong about that. I thought he did, but I could be wrong. No, as a matter of fact, he did have a sack, because I even remember the commentators talking about how Jordan Phillips had now his 5th sack on the season. So he did have a sack. I don't know why it wasn't in the stats line when I was making this, but it wasn't for some reason. He did have a sack, though. I'm positive about that. Shaq Lawson was 1 of 1, or 1 solo, 1 assisted, and a tackle for loss. Ed Oliver, 1 solo, 1 assisted, a sack, and a tackle for loss. And Jerry Hughes had a fumble recovery. in there as well. So as you can see, their defense was all over the place. Like I said, they had like 6 tackles for loss, like 5 or 6 pass defense, or no, not that many. They had 3 passes defense, but they still had 3 passes defense. They had 2 sacks. They had an interception. You know, so I mean, their and tackles all over the place. So they were, you know, their defense was all over the place, as it has been in every single one of our games to this point. Jason Sanders didn't kick any field goals, but he was 3 of 3 on his extra points. Steven Hauschka was 3 of 3 on his field goals with a long of 45, 2 for 2 of extra points. Matt Hawk had 4 punts, 49 average, none inside the 20, but a long of 57. Corey Bojorquez, which, by the way, I love that dude's name. I have no idea if it's like a common name in, you know, Spain or Mexico or wherever, whatever, you know, Latin America or Latin country there are Bojorquez's in, right? But it's an awesome name. It just sounds cool. Bojorquez. Anyway, he had 3 punts for a 42.3 average, 1 inside the 20 and a long of 45. In the kickoff game, Durham Smythe had 1, which was a run of a return of 12. It was a short kick, so that's why it ended up being him as opposed to Jakeem Grant, who was back for it in the end zone. But it was short, and so it ended up in Smythe's hands. Micah Hyde had 1 for them, which was a return of 45 yards. Preston Williams had 1 punt return for us of 19 yards, and Andre Roberts had 3 with a 7.3 average and a long of 9. So yeah, so at the end of the day, you know, I was wrong about some things in a positive way, but there is some information and some you know, data to point that it could have been closer to what I had predicted if some things would have been a little different, right? But, you know, this is any given Sunday, right? So at the end of the day, this is probably the best we can hope for in any given Sunday situation. We played, and last week too, right? So last week we played a bad team, and we played terribly against that bad team, but we did get a late game spark. We had an opportunity to win that game, and we could have won, should have won, if it wasn't for the decisions made by the coaching staff. You know, and then this game, we actually played a decent team, and we played well overall, and could have and should have won this game if it wasn't for the decisions of the coaching staff. So, you know, well, I don't know if we should have won this game. We definitely could have won this game. Last week, we should have won. We should have gone into overtime last week, and I think that we would have won the game. I think the odds would have been overwhelmingly in our favor, and I think we could have won last week. This game, I don't know about should win, but we definitely could have win, and we didn't win. We didn't even have that chance to win because of the bad play calling, the bad usage of timeouts by the coaching staff, and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's on them. It is what it is. So, you know, this is about the best I think we can hope for as far as any given Sunday. I think it's, you know, again, and it doesn't matter how hard these players try, whatever, and that's part of the reason why you're seeing this frustration boil over more and more. Xavier Howard had got ejected after, you know, being frustrated earlier, right? We're getting super injured. Christian Wilkins gets ejected this game. Bobby McCain has that confrontation that he's getting, you know, disciplined for. I mean, it's unraveling at the seams, and it's, you know, so we'll see, man. But I think it's inevitable that we're going to end up going 0-16. I think that this coaching staff is going to try and make sure that they find a way to lose every game if we're having competitive games. If we're not having a competitive game, then they won't have to worry about it, and we'll just suck and be miserable. But that's their fault, and their responsibility, because in those situations they designed the team to be that way, and so they just get what they wanted out of the design of the team. If these guys play, you know, their hearts out and push and fight and so on and so forth, and they make the game competitive, well, then the coaching staff, to me, has proven that they will find a way to ensure that we lose the game anyway. So that's my perspective and how I see it. I know that, you know, some of these other guys, I know TD, Phins Talk, disagrees. He was just told, from what I heard, I mean, there was somebody in the in my live stream chat had told me that TD was just blaming the players, that it's all their fault, blah blah blah, which is total bullshit. It's a scapegoat fucking argument at best. And you know, I can virtually guarantee that Doug also disagrees. I haven't watched his video yet, but I'm going to. So, you know, it is what it is. That's my perspective, and that's how I see things. So, again, there were some positives. There was, you know, some heart and some passion and some life in this team. But again, it's all going to be for naught. And then, you know, those decisions that were made, right? So those kind of self-defeating, self-destructive, you know, we're going to go out and lose philosophy kind of mentality, right? That's what got Minkah Fitzpatrick to want to leave to begin with. Not just that he was being misused, but also because they were showing clear indications that they weren't going to try and win at all. So if that continues, as it seems like it will, then you're going to lose more and more guys on this roster. And it's just going to, you know, it's just going to continue to unravel. And any minor successors or any kind of successes we could have at all will be vastly overshadowed by the ineptitude and by and that's the thing. So at best, right, with those decisions, if you're trying to be as fair as you possibly can with like those play calls or whatever, at best, it's ineptitude. And they just don't know what the fuck they're doing with the misuse of the timeouts and so on and so forth. So at best, your argument could be that they just don't know what they're doing. Worst case scenario, they're doing it on purpose. Neither of which are really good. And neither of which you would want to hang your hat on. So anyway, I mean, look guys, that's all I got for you. Again, that's my perspective. And so, you know, I hope you guys like it. I hope you enjoy it. You know, more and more people are coming to the light every week, it seems, as this continues to play out. I mean, there's still obviously, again, a lot of unknowns. You know, we have to see how they handle things between now and the trade deadline, next offseason, next draft, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But again, I think that they're not going to be able to recover from the damage that they've done. It's all going to be self-defeating. It's too self-destructive. It's too toxic. It's not going to be, you know, a plan that's going to have a chance for success for a lot of different reasons in the long term. So we'll see. We'll see. But, you know, I'm going to end it on that. I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Make sure that you share this around with all your friends and family. Spread the channel. Make sure you leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.